Welcome back, guys. So this time we'll be going into a jump pad / jump zone because we're going to be using triggers this time around. And this is using a bit of code from the physics samples that we'll use to grab our trigger collisions or trigger states. And let's just jump into the code here. So here's our jump pad authoring component. It's pretty standard of what we've been doing so far. Just have a float 3 for our jump force direction, and then we're just baking that out into a jump pad component here. So in our jump pad system, we're not using the character aspect this time around. We're just making our own system for this. And the system itself is in the update group for the after physics system group, but before the kinematic character physics update, since we're going to be updating the actual physics of the character, but after it actually enters this trigger. So in our job here, we are getting the jump pad components, this trigger events buffer, which we got from here in the GitHub. This is a folder from the physics sample, and this has the stateful buffers for collision and triggers. Before the kinematic character controller has its own stateful collision as well, which is why we didn't use that before, but this one is specifically for triggers. All right, and then we're getting the zone's transform and its actual entity. So we're going to loop through the trigger events, and then we will grab the other entity from our trigger event. So this will be on the trigger zone itself, and the other entity would be us, the player, or I guess technically anything else that would enter this trigger. So we just check if we are in the enter state and the other entity is our character. Then we're going to grab a copy of our character body, which is kind of the rigid body. We are going to use the math utilities to project on a plane our jump force, which will just give us a velocity, and then we will multiply the rotation of the zone with our jump pad force. And I'll show you why we're doing that when we get it into Unity. Then here we set the is grounded to false, so we don't snap back to the ground on the next frame because if we're grounded, it tries to stick to the ground. And then because we just had a copy of our character body, we need to set this component back to our player. And that is basically it. Show how this works. I'm using just our ignore physics cube since we were already passing through it anyways. For the physics shape here, you set the collision response here to raise trigger events. This will make it so it is a trigger and not a collider. But if you do this and you have a physics body, since it's no longer colliding with the ground, it will pass right through it if the motion type is set to dynamic. So I just set it to kinematic. Static would also work as well, but we want to actually move this cube around. This is our jump pad authoring. I have it set to do 20 units of force straight up. And we also will need this stateful trigger event buffer authoring. This is also from the physics sample, and you'll need this in order to grab your trigger events. And that's all the setup we need. So here we can just boop, there we go, straight up, and we'll just bounce on it for a little bit. So the reason why I have this as kinematic and why we were multiplying the transform rotation to the force is that we can now rotate our cube here, and now we have a directional pad. So now we can do like the Donkey Kong Country barrels that you can spin these around and they will throw you out wherever their direction's pointing. And you can see here that only the player gets booped around. All right, so that's it for our jump zones. Next time around would be the last tutorial for the character controller, and that is making AI characters. So look forward to that, and we will see you there.